Welcome to Femme Lead, the podcast on female leadership and role models. This show aims to inspire and equip you with the tools you need to navigate your career plans. Femme Lead brings inspiring career perspectives and strategies to guide your path to success. Your host, Alexandra, will interview role models on new, exciting topics with each episode. If you like what you hear, give us a review and subscribe to the show on your preferred streaming platform. Enjoy.
Antesa Jensen. She's an emotional intelligence expert who specializes in empathy, vulnerability, authenticity, and the emotional landscape. She teaches her clients to discern between reactive behavior, feelings, and thoughts, and guides them in developing honest, kind, and compassionate communication styles that build relationships and deepen intimacy, connection, and an intuitive sense of purpose in all areas of their lives. Her unconventional background is jam-packed with variety, from a major in French and music in college to a 12-year career in international investment banking, to ultimately landing in her vocation as a TEDx speaker, coach, and transformational facilitator and teacher. Her work has supported thousands around the world in discovering and living then their fullest potential. Antesa is kicking off career breakthrough by sharing how she identified and then amplified her through line, what's your through line, and in all aspects of her life, and how she shows up for herself, and also showing us how we can do that too. So without further ado, Antesa, take the stage.
Stand in front of my own picture. I do a lot of speaking events, and for whatever reason, every single time I am so crippling nervous, and here we are. And I'm an emotional intelligence expert, and the first thing that you're going to learn is that it's okay to express how you feel. And underneath this, I'm shaking a little bit. So I thought a lot about how I wanted to kick off this event and why you guys might be coming here, which of course I could only guess because I don't know the vast majority of you. And there's this word expression that's been floating around the internet lately, and it's called the Great Resignation. Have you heard this word before? Yeah. Raise your hand if you've heard this word. Raise your hand if you haven't heard this word. Great. That means that you're not on the internet so much, probably, so that's probably a good thing. So I want you to think about for a second, and this is what I want you to bring through this talk, is what the root of resignation is. Think about resignation as indifference. Who's ever felt indifferent in their life before? Great. If you haven't, good job. What does indifference and resignation feel like in your body? Where does it come from? Why does it happen? I like to think of indifference as a sort of lack of feeling, which I personally, as a great feeler, a deep feeler, I find very, very disturbing. It's a big red flag for me, but it used to not be, which is the purpose of this talk. And I see these two feelings, particularly resignation and indifference, as symptoms of living someone else's life. I see some of you already taking notes, and by the way, I encourage you to do so. So I think you have a notebook in your really awesome tote bag and a branded pen. Isn't Anda amazing? So if you want to take notes, feel free. Anyway, resignation and indifference, symptoms of living someone else's life. Let that land for a second. I see these two things as the biggest tormentors of our generation. We think that we have our path all lined up for us. If you choose your education, you kind of have an idea of what career you're going to go into. And then for whatever reason, I don't really know why, people don't really talk about what happens between around 22 to 24 years old in retirement, but presumably you just hang out in the same place for, what is it, like 40-something years? Does that sound exciting to anybody? I never questioned that, by the way. I went out of college and I thought, I'm going to get a job, and that job's going to turn into a career. And I'm going to stay there and I'm going to retire, and then maybe I'll buy a boat and travel the world when I can no longer walk and probably overweight and unhealthy, and maybe I'm on some prescription medications, I don't know. But waiting to live my life ultimately until I was 65, 70 years old, which is without us really realizing what we've been fed by our parents, by society, up until this point in our life. And we think that we go and we just pick this path. We just get on this path and then we go. And then we don't ever have to worry about our path again. And Joseph Campbell, who is the guy for the hero's journey, if any of you guys have ever heard from him before, he has this quote which I live by now, and I wish I had heard when I was 22 years old, which is, if you think your path is laid out before you, you're not on your path. If you're on your path, you're creating it every step of the way. By the way, if you try to Google that quote, it's probably not going to be verbatim because I'm super not good at remembering quotes verbatim. But here we are. So I haven't had a lot of personal experience in this journey, and I want to just paint a picture for you. At 32 years old, I found myself in the corner of my living room, my beautiful apartment in Fredericksburg, which I just moved out of actually, 10 years into a prosperous career in international investment banking, asking no one in particular, in the middle of the night, what the bleep am I doing with my life? Has anybody had that moment yet?
Yeah.
It's nice to not be alone. It was the beginning of what some might call an existential crisis. Some other people might call it a dark night of the soul. Anyway, so let's rewind. You guys all heard Anda explain or describe in my bio, or maybe you read it on the internet, that I studied French and music in college. I was really into humanities, psychology, philosophy, sociology. I loved it. I thought it was so interesting to see how the culture and our minds worked together, how language defined how we thought. Music, who doesn't love music? Music was my hobby growing up. I get asked often, still to this day, how do you get from humanities to investment banking to emotional intelligence and spiritual transformation? Did you guys already think that? Were you hoping I was going to give you the answer? Great. So I grew up in music. I had perfect pitch when I was a kid. It was very obvious. My mom was like, this girl is going into choir. I was in choir. I played instruments. It was my life. My dream when I was 14 years old was to be in a studio orchestra in LA playing blockbuster film scores. I watched movies just to see the credits. Hans Zimmer was my biggest idol. And I had my first existential crisis at 19 when I realized that music, although I loved it and it was my hobby and potentially also some aspect of my vocation, was not something I wanted to do as a career. And because I didn't know anything else, I freaked out. Because you're in college, you have to kind of know what you're doing. By 19, you're already told you should have this figured out by the time you're 16, which is so weird. And ultimately, I decided that I was going to switch majors. I dropped my music scholarship, and I ended up in French. And I ended up in French because I was really good at languages, and I thought this would be a fast track to graduating college early because I knew that I could skip out of some of the classes. I was hungry for life. I was hungry for real-world experience. And they talk to you a little bit in college, or at least when I went to college, I might be dating myself here, about what you can do as a career with your major. I think it's more common actually now than it was when I went to school, but not so much. Like if you were going to major in French, chances were likely you were going to be a teacher. And what's so funny to me is that when I was 20, I was like, I don't want to be a teacher. Do you guys know what I do right now? I was in major denial of this. So after I graduated, I thought maybe I will, I worked at a hotel in part-time, and I thought maybe I would go work in banquet serving in Las Vegas and have a career as a banquet server. I, at one point, thought I might do international law and study law. I didn't really know what it was, but it sounded really sexy, and so I was like, maybe I'll do that. And for a very short, brief period, I thought I was going to be a spy and a linguist with the CIA. That dream died really fast because, anyway, I won't tell you. So I moved to New York City when I was 22 years old. And my reason for moving actually had no rationale whatsoever. I got an insight, I packed my bags, I sold my car, I moved out of my house, I got on a plane in 2 weeks' notice. I had everything I owned in 3 suitcases. I did not have a job, I did not have a place to live, I didn't know a soul in New York City. but I was going. I did not want to repeat any of the old stories of my family's past. I was ready to get out and escape and start my own life. And I had recently graduated, and I was ready to hit the pavement running. And I was going to get a job, any job. And I had only 2 requirements. I needed to make $40,000 a year, which was basically keeping me from poverty level living in New York City because it's very expensive. And I wanted to speak French every day. So we all know that French is one of those, or languages are one of those use it or lose it sort of stories. And so I felt like with the burden of my student loans at $23,000 in debt. Those of you guys who studied in Europe don't know what that's like. Maybe you do, but it's a real problem in the United States. $23,000 is actually nothing as an American. Most people have at least $100,000 in debt. I thought that maybe if I spoke French every day, it would lighten the load and make it feel a little bit less painful, that I could sometimes not afford to eat and buy myself food because my student loan payments were so high, and I also had really high rent. So that was my logic. Needed to make 40 grand, needed to speak French every day. At the time, I had no idea what I was bringing to an organization. I didn't have that level of self-reflection yet. I knew that my baseline requirements were there, and I just kind of waited to be chosen and papered the town with my CV. Has anybody ever done that before? It's competitive, right? You want to make sure that you get a job because you need to get a job because you need to work, And that was what I did. I was just waiting for someone to see me and hopefully let me into this elusive system called job, career. It was the first time ever in my life that I ever had to face a full-time job perspective. So I want to say I didn't know anything else, and I also didn't know anything about anything. Because I was 22. But the contrast with that, or the irony of that, is that when you're 22, you think you know everything about everything. Is anybody in here 22 years old? Do you know everything about everything? Yeah, okay. I thought so too. I would have said the same thing, but in my mind, it was like, yes. So let's just build this out. I had no idea what investment banking was. And I mean no idea. My mom was a mortgage broker, so I understood what a bank was. When I got my job at BNP Paribas, my bank account had closed my own account because I was so financially irresponsible that they would not let me have a checking account. And then I got a job at an international investment bank managing $200,000 worth of expenses every year. And I didn't know what investment banking did. I had no clue. At the time, Google was really elusive. It didn't really give me any details about what I just said yes to, but they paid me $43,000 a year, and it was a French investment bank, and so I spoke French every day. Check, check. In 6 years, I grew from administrative assistant to IT financial manager. I doubled my salary. Does it sound familiar, Amanda? And I had discovered what I thought my purpose was: mastery of Excel formulas. I was at the top of the world. And then I met the Dane of my dreams, and I came to Denmark, and I planned to do it all over again, only better. I had one of these fluke unheard stories about moving to Copenhagen. I got a job interview the day after I landed at the top international or Scandinavian investment bank, and I was offered a high-paying job as the deputy of my team and a visa sponsorship 10 days later. Nobody has that experience. I understand that the gods wanted me here. The door just opened. I'm very blessed. And I see you in your struggle if that is not your experience. I thought my career was officially locked in. I thought. Subtly, over time, I noticed I couldn't really hear myself. I wasn't really having this contrast of what was it before, what was it after, and so it was kind of hard to notice. I just realized at one point that I had veered off my path. Has anybody felt that before? You don't really know what it is, but this isn't it. So I felt like I was living in someone else's life. This was that indifference. I had no idea where my path was, but I knew at that point that it had nothing to do with Excel. My life was great by everyone else's standards. I cannot tell you how often people were like, you have a visa sponsorship, you have a beautiful apartment in Fredericksburg, you have great friends, you have 7 weeks of vacation, you live in the happiest country on earth. Disneyland. And I was totally indifferent to it. So for me at the time, because I'm a go-getter and I'm overly ambitious and I'm an overachiever, which some of you may also relate to, for me this was my fire to start troubleshooting. And I'm going to spare you the details, but I basically exhausted literally every single physical resource first before taking a good look inside. Here. And what that means is that I picked up Olympic weightlifting, I got really into travel, and on those 7 weeks of vacation and on every single weekend and holiday, I was somewhere else, to the degree that I had to ask for dispensation when I applied for citizenship here because I have spent far too many days outside of the country in order to be eligible for my second passport that I have been working for 11 years for. I changed jobs a couple times, and I was still indifferent 2 years later, only it was just a little louder. And it took me years, a lot of coaching, a lot of meditation, a lot of spiritual inquiry in order for me to see where I got tripped up. And I'm going to tell you where I got tripped up. The first thing I got tripped up on was that I never questioned my unquestioned assumptions about what it means to have a career, a job, or be successful. I was terrified of 3 words. Not I love you. I was also terrified of those words. I was terrified of I don't know. Even though those same 3 words would eventually lead me home to myself. So would love. I did not think that I could be paid for what lit me up. At this point, I had an idea of what was lighting me up, but I didn't think I could be paid for it. Does anybody have this experience? I'm sure you do. If you have something that really lights you up and you don't have it as your job, it's a sort of torture. You feel like you're cheating on your soul a little bit every moment that you're not doing that thing. That comes with a question or with an assumption that we have about value and about who's determining where the value comes from. We're going to get to a little bit more into that later. And I know that I'm not alone here in having these experiences in my life. We tend to care more about what other people think without really realizing that that's actually our driver than what our heart is telling us. Does anybody relate to this? Maybe we know what our heart is telling us, but we go out into the world and we're like, nobody's going to validate that for me, so I'm just going to keep that over here. I'm under lockdown. Personally, I brought that mindset with me into entrepreneurship because why drop the indoctrination so quickly? And it led to a lot of struggle as I was starting a business here. We're told constantly from birth that if we follow all the rules, we're going to be happy. And for many, that satisfaction never comes, or it's waning, or it's there for a little while and then it starts to disappear. And my goal was I wanted to win the game of life. That was my goal. I'm going to win life because it was a competition. We're like this because we're all scared of failure. To some degree, this is true for everybody. We're afraid of being wrong. We're afraid of not being good enough. And on some level, that fear cripples us into either inaction at best or a sort of paralysis at worst, where we're just resigned and indifferent to the life that we're living. And you guys are all, for the most part, quite young, but this starts to become a lot more apparent as you get into your 40s and your 50s if you haven't actually done this work. Marianne Williamson, who I adore, writes in a book called The Return to Love, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. The first time I heard that quote, I cried. After months, years, of searching for clues about where my path was, I had eventually gotten trained to and certified to be a coach. And I started that with no intention of becoming a coach. That's how in denial of my work as a teacher was to me at the time. I see some of you guys smiling, you recognize this in yourselves. I wanted to take coaching training because I wasn't so great at relationships and intimacy, and it was like a relationship dynamic, desire, intimacy coaching training, and I thought maybe I would pick up some communication skills that would land me a husband and a father to my children. That's the truth. And I ended up realizing about 3 immersions into my coaching training that I loved it. It fed me. I was bright, I was excited, and I was so excited about coaching that I wanted to do it everywhere, even when I did not have consent to coach people. Consent is important. Unsolicited advice is not nice. So I was about to launch my business, which I did in my last year of working at Nordea, Adventure Awake, which was the thing that I thought no one would pay for. And turns out people pay for that. And I was terrified. And this time I was really clear that I was not terrified of failure, but I was terrified of finally knowing that soul-satiating success. And soul-satiating success is very vulnerable because you're putting your insides outside for the first time. So I want to ask you guys, what makes you brilliant? And I want you to think about that for a second. And I'm going to ask you a deeper question here, which is, what's the thing that you would do for free that you love beyond measure and that you would do and you wouldn't be able to live without doing in your life? The answer to that question is your through line, or some people call it a calling. And what makes you brilliant is getting out of your way and living that thing. What makes you brilliant has nothing to do with your skill, has nothing to do with how good you are at PowerPoint or Excel, spreadsheets and formulas, just in case anybody else needs to hear that one again. It has to do with how little you obstruct your soul from living its calling. And I know that may feel like a really big leap for many people here, but again, it's like that Joseph Campbell quote, 1 foot after another, and that's it. So, without this awareness of what our through line is, we risk making choices that are from the outside in. It's what society tells us to do. It's like going to a buffet and saying, okay, I can choose between canned corn, roast beef, and cheesecake. And in a way, actually, Danish high school kind of works like that. You have to pick like one of 3 different high schools, I think is how it works here. And instead of feeling, what am I hungry for? What am I actually here to do? And ultimately, we let that outside information define our lives, and actually it's just a fraction of the whole picture, but if we're looking through that lens, we can't see the rest. This is where we obstruct ourselves. It's like trying to find meaning in a speck of sand. The meaning comes when you see the sand on the beach. You have to zoom out. We risk missing opportunities for true satisfaction and fulfillment in our lives. We make decisions based on what we've been told is valuable instead of identifying and defining that value ourselves. And then at a soul level, we're underutilized. I can see that I am running out of time. Every single person on this planet is unique. Each one of you is a speck of sand here with your own purpose, your own brilliance, and every single person on this planet is brilliant. If you were to take that one message with you today and take it home, you would get very far, because not only are you brilliant, but so is everybody that you interact with, even the people that you don't like, even your boss. Not everyone on the planet is going to be great or satisfied by the narrow range of things society tells us carry the most value. Our work is to find out what that thing is for you, and then unrelentingly pursue it everywhere in your life. So I had a teacher once who said, don't get lost in the tyranny of the how, and Anda actually already talked about this. I'm not going to give you a recipe. Each person has to find their own way here, and each way is going to look totally different. That's how you know that it's your path, and there are some helpful mindsets along the way. The first is cultivate curiosity. Remember how I said I didn't like the 3 words, I don't know? They were what led me home. They were the thing that finally led me to asking one question that led to another question, that led to another question, that had to be that I got to the emptiness that had my wisdom reveal itself. The answers are not on Google. The answers are not in your career path. The answers are not with your friends or with your parents. The answers are in your heart. And the only way to access that is to ask questions. Not knowing is how you'll be shown what you need to see. Pay attention to what lights you up. This is practical. I love a good list. Start writing down what lights you up. It's really that simple. Follow the thread. Investigate unquestioned assumptions in your life. This takes a lot of work, and if you are actually willing here, you can really get to the bottom of why you want a specific career in a specific thing, and it might dissolve, which is a little scary, and it is one of the best ways for you to find out what really matters to you. I used to think I wanted a career. I used to think that having a full-time job was the end-all be-all of life. I don't feel that way anymore. The last one is a healthy discrimination. There's a lot of social pressure, and I hear Anna use this a lot, and this is my motivation for this one. There's a pressure to live up to your potential and to be in your purpose. Who's heard that before? I want to break down my definition of those two words, potential and purpose. Potential, I know I'm over time, I'm so sorry. Potential has to do with energy, okay? It's not a career concept that they teach you at networking events, okay? How much of your precious energy are you accessing and utilizing in your life? 20%? 50%? Maybe you're exhausted, but you still don't really feel like you're using all of you. Does anybody have that experience? Great. Hand in the air, yeah, good, love it. What is the thing that you would spend 100% of your energy on without ever questioning it? What is blocking that unpotentiated energy from being realized and utilized? Purpose is synonymous with presence. If you're at full potential, then the likelihood of you being present is pretty high. And if you're present in everything you do, which is to say in your being, then you're available to live your life on purpose. And what that means is mindfully, consciously, you're making each choice as it's arising for you instead of following a plan which may not be working for you anymore. That's what it means to be in your purpose. So the next time someone asks you or you demand of yourself, are you living up to your potential or are you living in your purpose? I want you to use that healthy discrimination and translate that to how are you using your energy in each moment? I had a poem that I wanted to end with, but are we super over time?
Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm in the process of writing a book right now, and I'm doing it with a ghostwriter. And I shared this with her because it's relevant. The book is going to be released in 2023. You can follow me on social media if you want to read it when it's coming into print. It's called Caught Shining, Pursuing the Sacred, Embracing the Intimate, and Learning to Live from the Inside Out. And as I read her my keynote for today, she sent me this poem. She said this is what it made her think of. And I was like, that's going to be the closing of my keynote. It's called The Invitation by Uriah Mountain Dreamer. It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for, and if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. It doesn't interest me how old you are. I want to know if you will risk looking like a fool for love, for your dream, for the adventure of being alive. It doesn't interest me what planets are squaring your moon. I want to know if you have touched the center of your own sorrow, if you have been opened by life's betrayals, or have become shriveled and closed from fear of further pain. I want to know if you can sit with pain, mine or your own, without moving to hide it, or fade it, or fix it. I want to know if you can be with joy, mine or your own, if you can dance with wildness and let the ecstasy fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes, without cautioning us to be careful, to be realistic, to remember the limitations of being human. It doesn't interest me if the story you are telling me is true. it's time to go. I want to know if you can disappoint another in order to be true to yourself. If you can hear the accusation of betrayal and not betray your own soul. If you can be faithless and therefore trustworthy. I want to know if you can see beauty even when it is not pretty every day. And if you can source your own life from its presence. I want to know if you can live with failure, yours and mine, and still stand at the edge of the lake and shout to the silver of the moon, yes! It doesn't interest me to know where you live or how much money you have. I want to know if you can get up after the night of grief and despair, weary and bruised to the bone, and do what needs to be done to feed the children. It doesn't interest me who you know or how you came to be here. I want to know if you will stand in the center of the fire with me and not shrink back. It doesn't interest me where or what or with whom you have studied. I want to know what sustains you from the inside when all else falls away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company in the empty moments.
Thank you, Antesa. I know Antesa for more than 3 years now, and the way we met was that I listened to one of her keynotes. I went to her after and I said, "Hi Antesa, you don't know me, but I love you." And Antesa gave me a very polite smile and said, "Very nice to meet you. You can go find me online," and now I'm gonna send that. You can find Antesa on antesajensen.com and on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, where you share a lot of content every single day. So I do encourage you to follow her if you would like to know more about her coaching practice, but also about her upcoming book. I put here Slido, and I would like to take one question that, well, basically it has two areas, but I'm sure that it goes back to the same core message. What do you do if you do not know what lights you up? Or if there is a pressure of financial stability related to maybe knowing what lights you up, but not knowing how to make money, or how to have stability in that?
Great, and I am going to do everything I can to be brave about that. Oftentimes when we don't feel lit up, it's because we feel a little numb. And usually the human instinct to do this is to just add more things into our life. A little wine, a little Netflix, a little extracurricular activities. We just pile on the things because it's like sugar. The more you eat, the more you need it in order to feel the delight of sugar. I have a very serious relationship with sugar, so dysfunctional sometimes. But if you don't know what lights you up because you just don't feel it, the key is not to add more things in your life. It's not to go to the buffet and then eat until you have to be rolled out on a wheelbarrow. It's to start to strip away. And this is so uncomfortable for most people because being alone with ourselves feels really confronting. And the invitation here is to be willing to sit with that. If you don't have a ton of money, you can there's tons of information on the YouTube. I have a free breath bundle, which is a guided breathing exercise, which helps thin the thoughts so that you can actually learn how to be still with yourself. There are lots of free and cheaper resources available. If you don't want to do that and you have some funds available, I highly recommend hiring a coach. I have a coaching program. That was not the purpose of you asking that question, but there is help. And one of the things that we tend to not do the most often is we don't reach out and ask for support. We think that, like, especially now because of the internet and the weird isolation we've been in because of COVID, we don't think that we're allowed to get help from other people, and we think that we need to figure this out all on our own. And I can tell you that if it weren't for dozens of people, I would not be where I am today. I would have crumbled. And being willing to ask other people for support and receive that support and actually try to do something different is the way to find it if you are totally lost. And then the second question, if finances are a concern, Elizabeth Gilbert has a video, I want you to watch it. It's called, you know this one, The Difference Between Hobby, Job, Career, and Vocation. I'm not going to take credit for any of this, but it's brilliant. If you need a job because you need to pay the bills, take a job because you need to pay the bills. Just don't confuse it for a career. Understand what you love to do, what your calling is, and use that job that does not suck your soul out. That's the key. If it sucks your soul out, get another job. Seriously. It's not worth it. As long as you can pay your bills, take a job, do what you need to do until you find the answers to these questions. It could be years. You just need to be patient with yourself. But be careful to try and make a job a career when it's not, because that is the thing that has us feel indifferent in our lives. And that is where a lot of people get stuck, because we're told success is career. And P.S., that's one of the largest unquestioned assumptions about success. So if you're going to do some journaling on that, recognize that you might have some assumptions about what it means to have a career. And if I don't, I'm a failure. And that's not true. So that's my answer to that question.
Thank you, Antesa. Let's give it a...
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Femme Lead Podcast. Share the news with your friends and follow us on social media at Femme Lead Podcast everywhere.